Hi, and welcome to Filmmakers Compass Podcast, a show where we talk about movies and, well, more movies. I'm D-Man, joined by CP. CP, how are you doing today?
Dude, I am fantastic. How are you doing?
You know what? It's still pretty cold here in LA, which is a little surprising, but we've had a couple storms roll through, and it's, mid-April now, and I got a sweater up. It's actually a little cool. But on the flip side, I'm not complaining. I actually love this weather. I don't know about you, but I enjoy the rain. Having grown up in the Midwest, I like it.
Yeah, it's been kind of an unpredictable couple of weeks here.
I can fast sense summer is approaching, though, not from the heat, but just from my calendar filling up. But the weather is not suggesting it yet. It's still pretty cool. It is definitely not pool weather out here. So
no, dude, it's a surprising trend.
yeah, for sure. Well, anyway, that doesn't really have anything to do with movies, but that's just how my life is going. So glad to hear you're doing well. But before we get into our topics this week, I want to go ahead and do a couple shout outs. So first up is actually a shout out to my mom. So hi, Mom. She actually was talking to me about the podcast. And I don't know if we ever mentioned this before on air, but I was just going to bring it up because it reminded me that we should probably talk about it a little bit every once in a while. But that is that she enjoys watching the show on YouTube. And you heard that right. Watching the show, not just listening to the show. So that was interesting to me because, yeah, we do release this show on YouTube and you can stream it there. So I figured I'd just bring that up and let everybody know. Thank you, Mom, for the feedback. I really appreciate it. CP, I don't know, how do I say this? I have not heard a response from Ivor to our response to his responses.
I think it's just because he doesn't actually want to come on the show and talk about the stuff you suggested he come on.
Maybe I don't know.
He's scared.
He left us, a lot of messages, and then I'm pretty sure we read off every single one, and I haven't heard from him since. So, Ivor, where are you at?
Maybe he's no longer listening.
He's out there. I know he's out there. And then just wanted to do a quick happy birthday shout out to both Marcos and Colin. Hope you guys have fantastic birthdays. So, CP, if you don't have any shout outs on this episode, let's go ahead and jump into our box office breakdown this week.
Things have changed a little bit from previous week. For one, Dune has actually risen back up into the top 5. If you remember last week, it was number 6 in the box office, jumped to 5. Kung Fu Panda is in the 4 position. And that also moved up from the 5 position. Ghostbusters is holding strong at 3. And Godzilla vs. Kong has been knocked out of the number 1 spot and is number 2. And that's because the number 1 movie in the United States is A24's Civil War, which made about $25 million in its opening weekend. So pretty good opening weekend at the box office for A24. Now, when we look at the worldwide box office, things are pretty much exactly identical to what they were last week, if you recall. Kung Fu Panda 2, however, did swap spots with Godzilla vs. Kong, the New Empire. So Godzilla vs. Kong is now in the 3 spot internationally. Kung Fu Panda 4 is in the number 2 spot.
Yeah. Okay.
And Dune Part 2 is still going strong at the international box office in the number 1 position, making over $410 million internationally.
Very impressive. I mean, it's one of those things where obviously you look at A24 Civil War performing well here in America. Well, that is a very American derived story right there. So I can't imagine that movie doing well at the international box office. But also because it's being distributed by A24, which is mostly just an American distributor, correct? They are not normally doing major international numbers with most of their films.
Well, most of their films have kind of lower end on the box office anyway, if you look at their returns. I think the one big exception to that was Everything Everywhere All at Once, which was obviously an international phenomenon.
It's kind of remarkable when you think about A24 and where they're at today. Literally, like you said, everything everywhere all at once. One, they've distributed a film now that's won Best Picture, I think won Best Director, the actors, they're basically at the top of the awards season as well as at number one at the box office. So they're doing pretty good. And I think A24 has only been around like what, 10 or 15 years,
Yeah,
something like
about
that.
15 years. I think the really interesting thing about it is they seem to be doing the exact opposite of the big studios.
Filling that hole of like, not these big major tentpole films or award season films. There's a lot of different stories within A24's lineup.
Right? They're releasing smaller budget films, a couple $1 million are most of these. They're also focusing on art first, which I think is part of the reason why they've really been able to attract some huge directors to come and work on their projects, which the recent trend for the rest of Hollywood has really been to seem to kind of shun directors and try and make
Yeah.
them conform, whereas A24 seems to be letting artists be artists first, realizing that they will see returns down the line.
And it is pretty cool too when you think about a lot of these movies are getting full theatrical runs, which is quite impressive given that most of the major studios, right, they're looking at like, hey, if we're going to release a movie in the theaters, it needs to make hundreds of millions of dollars to be considered a success. So whether that's, Pixar and Disney with animated fare, DreamWorks, Skydance, all that, or, you're looking at, you need Teflon brands like Star Wars, Marvel, that you're like, hey, it might cost us $225 million to make it, but it's pretty much guaranteed to make like 400 million. So we could break even at worst case scenario. Where with A24, they've put out all kinds of different types of movies and they
Mhm.
don't need to necessarily make the same numbers that a Marvel film would have to make, which is quite impressive because you look at the big studios, and normally when you're making movies of that budget, they're just pushing them to their streamers. That's what they're using to
Mhm.
populate
Mhm.
and draw new users to the streaming services. And here they're actually getting a theatrical run, which is
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah. It is definitely it's definitely a cool thing to see. It's nice to have people making movies that are art first.
We do have to acknowledge, though, that Civil One, while it is number one, it is also A24's most expensive movie ever produced. So maybe they're trending that way. I don't know.
Yeah, I did see that this one was made for $50 million. So it's already made almost half of its budget back at the box office, but that is kind of a break from their norm where they're focusing on low budget films that if they happen to perform well, you have a great payday in the box office. It's a little different when you're throwing $50 million into a movie.
I don't know if you know their whole rundown or filmography, but do you have a favorite A24 film? I think mine would be Ex Machina.
Mm, I really liked Uncut Gems.
Adam Sandler.
Yeah,
That was a good movie. I mean, the anxiety I felt in a couple of those scenes was palpable.
yeah,
Like, I don't know
yeah.
how they were able to pull that off, but part of the, like, sometimes it almost made me want to, like, turn it off because I was like, oh my God, this is, like, so overwhelming. But that was with intention. Yeah, I liked Uncut Gems. That one was pretty good. But yeah, Ex Machina, you know, was probably the most interesting to me. And I can see like that's a film where I totally understand how do you keep that film low on the budget? You're like probably didn't cost that much,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Just some special effects work and a couple different things, but you're like all the budget can basically go there and you get to make this sort of thoughtful puzzle,
yeah,
which I
yeah.
thought was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that movie. In fact, I might watch it again. If I do, keep an eye out on our social media. I might announce it if anybody's interested in maybe like a live tweet or something. I might put Ex Machina on again. CP.
All right. You should do it, dude. You definitely should do it.
Any other news regarding the box office? Because it looks like Civil War was the only new entrant in the top five.
Yeah. That was the only change, and I did see it. I don't know if you got a chance to see it yet.
No, I haven't seen it yet, but I am going. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, the premise itself is interesting because obviously, this has been a topic of discussion. I think, probably dating somewhere back to like Trump's first presidency, maybe even all the way back to like the Occupy Wall Street movement. you could kind of see remnants of this sort of talk, the Tea Party and all this. Like, so to get a film out of it, I don't know how it ends, but hopefully with America united.
Yeah, I was a little surprised, and part of it is I thought this was such an opportunity to talk politics, and it's really not a film about politics. They don't really explain the factors that led to the Civil War, kind of what are the politics at play, and there isn't a lot of resolve, which I thought was strange. But I think the other surprising thing is, and I just think people should know this going into it, it's actually not a movie about war.
Really? Oh, I mean,
It's
that
a
was my
movie
impression.
about these photojournalists covering the war and kind of looking at more of like the tragedies and the horrors of war.
They need to do a better job with their trailer construction then, because I do not remember thinking that at all the last time I saw the trailer.
Well, and that was my thing. And so I went into it thinking that it was going to be kind of this military action suspense thriller. And there's definitely elements of suspense and kind of drama, but it is not the military action movie I think that we were sold that it was going to be.
Yeah, that's definitely a mismatch. I mean, the only hint that I've had about what you're describing is that when I did look up the film, it said starring Kirsten Dunst, who also had a relatively minor role in the trailer. And she was the lead, and I believe is a journalist. And that's all that in terms of the marketing materials that I've seen for Civil War, that's all I've seen that hints at journalism being a focal point.
Yeah, so that for me was just a really big surprise because that was not, I mean, even when you look at, the posters, the trailers, it looks like this heavy duty kind of military movie.
Yeah, no, it really does. Especially some of the shots on like they have like the deserted freeways and they have some people sort of held at gunpoint and all this different stuff, messages from the president, which sort of give it this almost like epic quality. I think of like Independence Day, you know, or even
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah,
X-Men,
yeah,
X2, X-Men United, where like the
yeah.
president has to address the country, stuff like that. It is actually, now that I mention it, I think I said Ex Machina. I believe it's the same director, right? I think it's
Yeah, it is. It
Alex
is.
Garland.
Yep.
Is that his name? Yeah.
Same.
So now that I know it's about journalism, I'm kind of a little bit more intrigued.
Well,
Um,
the other thing too, though, is I mean, that kind of works with A24's MO, though, in the sense that there's not these massive Saving Private Ryan beach scenes, right? It's
okay.
smaller in scale because we're following this group of journalists in Civil War torn America. And I think that that works because unfortunately there are a couple sequences in the movie that they're hinting at a much grander military movie. And unfortunately, those are really heavily CG'd and it
Mm,
kind of falls short, in my opinion.
okay. Well, I mean, I was excited for the film that I saw the trailer for. Now I'm a little bit intrigued to see if this movie maybe goes a little bit deeper into the perils of modern day journalism and what they're, up against when reporting across, I guess, enemy lines, technically. So it could be interesting. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
So that's it. Audience, if you have seen Civil War, let us know your thoughts. Otherwise, maybe we'll talk about it again once D Man has seen it himself.
Sounds good. Iron Claw, was that A24?
That was A24. The Whale was
Nice.
A24. Lady Bird was
Ladybird.
A24. Moonlight.
It's quite a few really popular movies.
And then they have had a lot of great horror films like Hereditary, Midsummer, It
Yeah.
Follows.
Wow, they've done fantastic. Kudos
Mm-hmm.
to A24. That's awesome. All right. Well, I guess that does it for the box office breakdown. Now, this week we wanted to jump into a segment that pops up occasionally on this show, but this week we're doing the Pop Culture Minute. And I'm going to throw it over to you, CP. Let us know what we got going in pop culture.
I don't know if you've heard, you being our audience, I know D-Man has because we talked about this earlier. Francis Ford Coppola is finally getting around to making the movie he has always wanted to make. Took him 40 years to get here, but he has finished shooting the movie Megaopolis. Did I say that right?
Yeah, I think Megalopolis or something.
Megalopolis, which is a movie about some futuristic dystopian New York. And this has always been his passion project. He has apparently based it off of the fall of Rome. And he's been
Interesting.
working to make it for a long time. He finally decided he was going to self finance it. He screened it for a number of studio execs and friends and colleagues in the industry. And it's really had a mixed reception, I would say.
Interesting.
Lots of people are saying that it's very experimental. Other people are praising him for the vision. People are saying that he has taken elements that are only reserved in Hollywood for the most big budget superhero and sci-fi movies and has pulled it into this kind of drama piece from an artistic director. And they say that it's a really mind-blowing film. However, there's a lot of people, and unfortunately, none of them have gone on record. These are all leaking this as unnamed sources saying there's no way he's ever going to get distribution.
Now, why? Because there's a certain element to this film that feels inevitable. Like Francis Ford Coppola, sort of like his magnum opus. Like, how could nobody want to distribute it? Like, that seems crazy.
Well, I think it's a couple things. For one, as we talked about earlier, Hollywood seems less and less interested with artistic filmmakers, the auteurs, and more interested in known IP and blockbusters. I
Okay.
mean, case in
I mean,
point, there was a fallout between Christopher Nolan and Warner Brothers, right? We've heard time and time again over the last couple of years how some really talented filmmakers are frustrated with the studio system just because they don't think they're getting the respect. Even people in recent years like Martin Scorsese have had trouble getting distribution with their films.
yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I think we all recognize that just based on the slate of films that are coming out each year that hit the theaters. But at the same time, it just seems like even if you're, using your like long-standing 40-year career connections within Hollywood, it feels like Francis Ford Coppola should be able to close a distribution deal with someone, even if he goes to like Elon Musk and he's like, "Yo, you just want to like put this out there?" Like,
Well, and Coppola has had a very opposite opinion of this. He's publicly seems not worried about it. He's going to premiere the film at Cannes, apparently. And he points to the fact that 40 years ago, when he tried to distribute Apocalypse Now, the studios didn't want to touch it. No one wanted to put it out. And he self-distributed that. And obviously it was wildly successful. I think he asked his buddy Lucas to come in and help him
yeah.
distribute that one. And they made a ton of money. And it's considered, I think, one of the most successful theatrical runs of all time. So I think he's like, I've been here before. Doing this again isn't such a big deal. I'll do it myself if I have to. But it is a little weird that Hollywood seems so hesitant to put out this film by Coppola.
Now, I'm assuming then that the distribution deal, because if I remember correctly, if we go back to our 2023 recap episode, we had a segment in there where we looked forward to 2024 and what we were most looking forward to. I want to say either you or myself listed this movie as one of the ones that we were looking forward to in 2024. Now, it does sound like it will debut at the film festival, but will it actually get a theatrical distribution in 2024? It seems like that is up in the air.
Maybe push to 2025. I mean, I imagine this is going to be seen in the theaters, especially with the star power apparently that he's rolling out in this movie. I think that there's going to be a demand for it.
I mean, here's to hoping that this deal gets closed sooner rather than later because this was a movie that I definitely want to see. So I'm excited. It feels like a director who has a vision, who has something to say about a lot of different themes and things that, go on. Because if I'm correct, I believe you described it as like they're going to take this sort of like dystopian, destroyed, decayed city and try to like rebuild it. Or the story is, how do we rebuild it?
Yeah.
Which is interesting. That is interesting. So I would definitely go see that movie. If it came out this weekend, I might even go over Civil War.
I mean, it would be interesting, and you have a master at the helm, so I think that always helps. No offense to Alex Garland, but you're not Coppola, man.
I hope it does come out because I think you're right. It does deserve to be seen on a big screen. It just seems like, I think of a good example is Oppenheimer.
Mm,
Yes, it has some cool sequences where you're like, wow, that was better on the big screen. But in general, the way they shot it with IMAX and all these different things, even though it's a bunch of talking heads, it just plays well when you're in the theater. And this seems like one of those movies where I'm like, it may not be, Star Wars or Independence Day or something where you have these epic action sequences that need to fill up the whole frame, but probably plays better in the theater. So I'm down to go. And I got my A-list membership, so I'm already booked.
perfect, dude. I'm excited.
All right. Well, I think that does it then for a our pop culture minute. And moving on to our main topic this week, CP. I hope you're excited for this because it's a lot of news. So, what we wanted to do this week, instead of focus on one film, we wanted to take a look at 2024's Cinemacon and all of the announcements and previews and teasers and everything that came out of there. We're going to do a rundown of CinemaCon 2024. So this took place April 8th through 11th. So, within the last week. And there was a ton of news that came out of CinemaCon, which is
Yeah, that's
remarkable.
true.
I mean, we were at WonderCon. There wasn't really a bunch of announcements or anything,
No, no.
you know, not like this. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into our sort of rundown. And I want to get your thoughts. And then obviously, each of these topics we'd love to throw to the listeners, to our viewers. Hey, mom. And you guys let us know what you're interested in, if you think this is something that will do well, and whether or not you're into it personally. So first up, CP, is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle live action The Last Ronin movie. Now, I don't know if have you read the Last Ronin comic?
I actually have. It's pretty awesome.
So it is pretty cool. Now, is it a comic or a graphic novel?
I call it a comic, but
Okay.
I think they're kind of both the same at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, anyway, I have not read it, so I don't know the story, but my my impression is that the movie or the comic book is much more adult oriented than the sort of, 80s toy version of the TMNT that we often associate with that. Even looking back to last year and the movie that came out in 2023, Mutant Mayhem, is still very, general audiences, family fare, and it appears that this one will be different.
Yes, it's a much darker story. Significantly darker.
Now, can you give us maybe a premise? Like what are we
Well,
looking at here?
imagine a future where some of the Ninja Turtles are dead,
Okay.
and it is up to the remaining Ninja Turtles to exact some vengeance. And I'm just going to leave it at that because it's pretty freaking awesome.
I mean, the title itself, Last Ronin, is pretty cool. And even though there was no new footage that was shown at CinemaCon, one of the things that got many people excited was that this movie will be accompanied by an R rating. So that is
Yes.
a first for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle franchise, and it does make people think that, in terms of all of their weapons and all of the, fighting and everything that goes on with the TMNT, that we're finally going to get a sort of new take on all of that,
Yeah.
which
It's going to be interesting to watch, man.
yeah, it could be pretty cool. So I'm here for it. I love the TMNT, and that includes even the concert version or the TV show with the girl. So, what was her name? Daphne or
Yeah.
something like that? I don't know.
The one on Fox.
Yeah, it was terrible. But I mean, hey, I watched it as a kid, and I love the Turtles. So an R-rated live action Last Ronin version sounds incredible. So sign me up. And
I'm excited too. It could
next
be
up,
really interesting to see.
CP, this is a weird one. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this, but apparently they are doing a Scary Movie reboot. So Scary Movie is the franchise, I believe it was by like the Wayans brothers back in the like
Early 2000s.
2000s. Yeah, and obviously it's one of those like parody flicks. I think they had a lot of them. They had like Epic Movie and Disaster Movie and all
Yeah.
these things
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
they're basically like comedy, parody movies for the different genres of film. So this one obviously is dedicated to scary movies. I think it was originally starring like Anna Faris, and it went for like five. They got five movies out of that,
Yep. Yeah.
which is quite remarkable. And I think the franchise, went into hibernation like a decade ago. And
Yeah.
apparently they're looking at rebooting it. So at that time, I think the sort of main visual elements were associated with like Scream. So I think the bad guy was like the Scream bad guy. I forget his name. Ghostface or
Ghostface. Or and then they use Jigsaw from the Saw movies too.
yeah, like so they were always taking whatever popular horror films there were at those times. They have versions of like The Ring and uh different things that were going on at that time. So I'm interested. Again, this is something that didn't have any new footage or a trailer. But if they were to if they were to reboot Scary Movie, which movies would you maybe want to see parodied?
That's a
Like you
good
said, they
question.
have like Heredity. There's what's the one with the doll? I
Chucky
can't.
or Megan?
Megan. Yeah. I mean, Chucky
They've
could
had
make
a
his
couple
way.
dolls.
I was like, Chucky could make his way into any of them. There's like Smile, which apparently at CinemaCon they announced there's going to be a Smile too. So I don't know. I figure like all those things will end up getting parodied, you know, at some point.
Yeah, that's a good question. Because we haven't. I mean, we've had some good horror movies as of recently. I mean, I guess we'll have to see what they decide to do with them. I would like them to go back and I think maybe parody more classic like 70s horror films. Because it seems like during the initial run of Scary Movie, they were really looking at stuff kind of from the 90s and 2000s.
Like I think
So
they had references to maybe The Exorcist or a couple like super famous ones. But if they could go back, that would be kind of cool too. It might also give some relevancy to a new generation that maybe hasn't seen these older horror
yeah,
movies.
right.
The references themselves may actually, in a meta way, get people to go watch some older movies. And it's cool
Yeah,
too, because
yeah,
with streaming, a lot of them are available. Like you
yep,
can either rent them or they're already in the libraries on the streaming services.
yep.
So that's kind
Yeah,
of cool.
I agree.
Like I think everybody should see The Shining
Right.
at least once. Here's one that I thought your input on this would be interesting. They're looking at going back and doing a prequel Star Trek movie before the 2009 J.J. Abrams reboot. Now, what are your thoughts on Star Trek? And now they sort of have this like multiple timeline universe. And if they go back before, my impression of that is that they will technically go back to the main timeline before it branched. Do you think
I
there's a reason to even do this?
No, and I mean part of it for me is I'm like, look, there's a really popular cinematic Star Trek universe that you have reestablished. If there's no way to get that cast back together or a story worthy of telling on the big screen, then I would be looking at some of the other Star Trek series that are out there and seeing what you can do about that. I don't really understand the whole prequel. I think that they're making this way more complicated than they need to be.
Well, I mean, Star Trek on streaming, the shows that are out are doing really well.
Discovery, Picard, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it might be worth it to maybe explore what people are already interested in rather than obviously prequels serve a certain point if there's a story left untold or, that's been left to the imagination that you want to explore. But it doesn't sound like they really knew what that was, or at least were not forthcoming enough to share that at this time, where
Mm-hmm.
you're like, so why go backwards?
Yeah, no, I agree.
I don't know. Yeah, that one threw me for a loop. One of the other ones they actually did announce was Transformers 1, which I know you're a huge Transformers guy.
I am a huge fan of Transformers, and I'm very excited. It looks awesome.
Well, the big announcement, while they did talk about Transformers 1, which is the sequel to what was the other one? Beasts or
Transformers Beast Wars.
Beast Wars. Yeah. So this is the sequel to Beast Wars, I believe. But more than that, they did confirm, CP, that the G.I. Joe crossover is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So is that something you're excited for?
Well, I think we talked about it in an episode a while back after I saw the movie. They do hint at it. It's definitely an interesting way to kind of bridge both the sort of flailing properties. I am very confused as to how they're going to make it work within the existing canon of both the G.I. Joe cinematic universe and the Transformers cinematic universe. And it may just be one of those things where they're like, don't ask too many questions. We're just kind of shifting everything into this new direction. Don't worry about it. But
Would you
I mean,
rather
I'm definitely going to go see it. You know that.
would you rather see it as like an Avengers like crossover type film, or would you rather just see each of the properties bleed into the other's movies? Or both, I guess.
I think it really just kind of depends. And it's just because with the 3 G.I. Joe movies and the 7 Transformers movies, we've had hit and misses. So if this is a great
A
movie,
lot of
then
misses.
that's all we need. But if it's a failure, then you know
Well, we
it's
may never get
such
that
a grab
cross.
bag. Who knows what we're gonna get, right?
Well, something else that has a sequel coming out is Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh, dude,
So
I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
I wanted to say, I don't know if you saw this, but there is also a show coming out.
The Knuckles
I,
show.
yeah, Knuckles on I think Paramount Plus.
Yep.
And what are your thoughts on Sonic 3 and then the Knuckles show? Like, what do you think? What do you want to see next happen in that franchise?
I mean, the big concern that I had was obviously there were rumors that Jim Carrey was done acting, done, and he was not going to come back. And he's a great, villain in the Sonic movies. And I don't think that the trilogy would be complete if we didn't have Jim Carrey in it. So I'm glad that he's going to be returning, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I just, I
Is
love
there
those franchises.
I mean, I think Sonic definitely outperformed people's initial reactions to that first trailer that really threw people for a loop. I think people were under the impression that Sonic will be dead on arrival, and it has definitely proved everybody wrong. I mean, it's
Yeah.
made a ton of money already. It's a successful franchise now. It's getting its own sideshow. They've been able to branch out with new characters and voice actors because if I'm correct, Idris Elba is the voice of Knuckles, which is
Yep.
awesome. And he's
Yep.
coming back for the show too, which again, I think was contingent on whoever was taking that role, but that's awesome. That's
Yep.
like really cool.
Oh, it's great. And we're
So-
getting Shadow the Hedgehog in Sonic 3. So I think it's going to be cool, man.
Yeah, it definitely got a lot further along than I thought it would. I mean, I wasn't a big believer in video game movies. You know, they've just done so poorly for so long, but now we have Sonic the Hedgehog and Super Mario that have both blown past expectations. So who knows? Maybe video game movies are progressing in a way that, we might see some more franchises get adaptations.
Yeah, that's true. It's nice when they're done right, and I think we've seen a couple examples the last couple of years of really delivering and giving fans what they want to see.
All right. So the next movie that got announcements, this one's weird because this is one of those examples of a film that was a huge hit in its time. Didn't get a sequel until maybe it's too late. Think like Sin City.
Mm-hmm.
That's Gladiator 2. And I don't know if you've seen anything from this or heard anything about it. I believe footage has been shown, and doing some research online, I did find that the studio execs love what they've seen, but that is not always the best indication of how awesome a movie will be, what the studio execs thought.
Yeah. Oh man, this is one of those movies that I am so unsure of the story. I mean, for one, the original Gladiator is epic in every way, and it's an incredible
awesome.
film. But the main
Are you
character,
not entertained?
spoiler alert, is dead. So I have been so unsure of how they're making a sequel. Obviously, there's been a lot of theories online. They've been releasing details of what the film will be, which is interesting, but it still kind of baffles me that we are getting a sequel. And as you said, 25 years later.
Yeah, it without the main character, or even if the main character has aged dramatically and you're going to have him not be a main character in this one, like assuming, right, he lived. He didn't. So he's, if he's going to be in it, it's either going to be in like a ghost or dream sequences or something weird. Aside from that, I'm just not sure, like narratively at the end of the first one, where they would want to take this. It's kind of weird. Like, it doesn't seem like there's a
Yeah.
natural progression
Yeah.
here to where I'd be like, where there's like some major unanswered question where I'm like, oh man, I've been waiting for this movie because I just wanted to know about X. I'm like, not really.
No, you're
Uh,
absolutely right. And again, without Russell Crowe, this is like Top Gun Maverick without Tom Cruise. It feels wrong. Now, everything that they've said from CinemaCon, everyone is blown away. Apparently, they showed 5 minutes of the movie, which are, people say, absolutely incredible. The problem is, and I'm sure you had the same problem, I did a lot of digging online looking for this 5 minute clip, and it's
I
just
that's
fan made trailers, and they look
Yep.
terrible.
They look awful, and they're actually doing a disservice because I'm sure there are some people who believe that's the real trailer. And I did the same thing. I went down that rabbit hole trying to find it. I was hoping I could, even if it was like grainy, phone footage or
Yeah.
something, I was like, someone's got to have it somewhere, but I didn't find it.
And
So
more importantly, I'm a little disappointed with Paramount that with this massive word of mouth surrounding Gladiator 2, why did you not go to us, the fans, and say, no, trust us. This is it. Here's some stills. Here's a 30-second clip. Here's the whole 5 minute. Like, why is Paramount not pushing something out to us now? Which I think they
yeah,
should be.
it's kind of weird. And CP, while I was looking for that footage, I did stumble upon a description. Now, I don't know if this is 100% true. It doesn't sound true, but like people were talking about it like it was. I stumbled upon this forum where they talked about an original sequel to Gladiator that was pitched back in the early 2000s. And apparently in this, like, it ends up that like Marcus Aurelius is like an undead warrior and he like time travels to different wars. So like he literally goes to like World War One and then he's in Vietnam and then he's like in present day. And I was like, there's no way anybody actually wrote this. But apparently there was some version of this, either a treatment or an actual script that was floated around and thankfully rejected.
Okay.
But they were trying to get Russell Crowe back, and apparently, yeah, to do that, they were going to make him like immortal.
I mean, now it sounds like they're just making like the first attempts at the God of War movie.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. This is such a stretch here.
Wow.
But I will say, based on the involvement of some of the original people, both writers, is it Ridley Scott? I think
Yep.
was the director.
Yep.
I don't know if he's directing.
No,
I
my
could.
understanding is Ridley is directing,
He is okay.
and
I
the
know he was a
cast
producer.
is they've got Pedro Pascal, it's got Denzel Washington, it's got some heavy hitters in it.
So I guess I'm in. Like going back to what was the other movie we were talking about before? The Star Trek sequel where I'm like, I don't know if we need it. I think the same thing here, except this time I'm like sold.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean,
Yeah,
and the other thing too is like Ridley Scott's got enough credibility that even his flops aren't like awful movies. So I'm like, it's going to be something visually special.
all right. Well, here's one of the big things that happened at CinemaCon, and this actually is kind of wild, and that is Disney made an appearance, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, because Disney on top of the world, when you go all the way back to like 2019, you know, I think Pixar was still the premier animation studio in all of animation. Frozen 2 had just come out and was the highest grossing animated film of all time. They were riding on the coattails of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi in terms of box office receipts for Star Wars. And in the MCU, they literally, pinnacle 10 years worth of storytelling. So Disney didn't need to go to Comic-Con. They didn't need to go to CinemaCon in order to make announcements. They were so big at that time that they were able to basically just host their own conference, which I believe is called like D24.
D23.
Why did I get 23? 24. Probably year 24. That's why.
You were thinking A24 and Disney coming
Yeah,
together
easy
for their
mix
own
up.
convention.
Easy mix up. D23. And apparently at that time, yeah, they were skipping the major conventions and were just making their announcements themselves. Well, Disney, after, a lot's happened in the last 5 years, and they are no longer the king of the hill. And they've returned to, you
Hmm.
know, the
Hmm.
comic book and conference circuit. And they're making announcements again, which is pretty exciting because I think for fans that were in attendance, that's definitely pretty cool. And it's a way to connect with your most hardcore fan base.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I would agree.
I was very excited that Disney was making announcements. And the first step that we're going to talk about, CP, is Captain America Brave New World. So I don't know if you heard anything about the actual presentation, but they did actually air a scene from the film in which Thunderbolt Ross is talking to Falcon,
Hmm.
Anthony Mackie's character. And then I believe they played at least some semblance of a trailer, although probably not a trailer that will ever be released officially. It was
Yeah,
just for Cinemacon.
yeah.
And apparently, the whole thing that got fans super, super excited was that Thunderbolt Ross was tasking new Captain America, Sam Wilson, to reassemble the Avengers. So, does that get you pumped? Did you get goosebumps?
I mean, no, no, because I told you, I, I see nothing good in the future for Marvel. So we'll see what they do. But I feel like this is just going to be another pile of hot garbage.
Well, Anthony Mackie did make an appearance, and apparently, while discussing the film, they did say that this will be in the vein of Winter Soldier, so a little bit more of spy thriller rather than alien sci-fi adventure.
Hmm.
So that's probably a good way to go, and an attempt to sort of reground the franchise, both Captain America and maybe even the overall MCU a little bit in some realistic storytelling that's not always, hopping dimensions or time traveling or all of these different elements that sort of, can lose people along the way. So I am excited for that. I like the tone of where the film's going, and I'd like to see what they could do with Cap because I think if they can sort of restore him in that rightful place, right? Cap, can you reassemble the Avengers and put him back into a leadership role and build out a new team? We might be able to move forward with some semblance of direction here. Even
Yeah.
if Captain America himself starts making appearances in other people's movies to recruit the same way that Nick Fury did in Phase One. Can we sort of build to something again?
No,
Maybe
I would agree. That's
a
that's a
little,
valid point.
yeah, like maybe a little replication of that might help. A little Phase One pixie dust back on the MCU, and let's
Yeah.
just see if we can build to something again and get people pumped about the, you know, momentum that we're on.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
So I am looking forward to that. Obviously, they teased some new footage from Deadpool and Wolverine, and it got a fantastic reaction. Crowd loved it, which is great from hardcore fans. Now we've talked about Deadpool and Wolverine, so I don't know if we want to dive too deep here. I didn't. My impression was that the footage was non-spoiler and that there weren't really any major new revelations about that movie. I mean, I am still very excited for it.
Yeah, we've talked about it, and it seems to be confirming everything we kind of expected from the movie. So it's not like there was anything major coming out of it that threw our whole conversation from 2 weeks ago on its head. So
Yeah, right. They're not like, oh, it ends up you know, Wolverine's only in it for 2 minutes and then he departs, and you're like, well, why
yeah,
is he in the title?
or they didn't reveal that this is going to be, really the linchpin kicking off their new version of the X-Men or something like that, right? Like,
Yeah. So they kind of, I wouldn't say they played it safe. They did reveal new footage, which is great for fans that were in attendance.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, you're not leaving with anything that we didn't already know.
Yeah.
So they also previewed two Disney films, Moana 2 and Mufasa. So again, two movies that I'm kind of like, do we need them?
That's sort of how my feeling is. Moana 2 seems really weird because I feel like there's animated Moana, then live action Moana, and it seems like a lot of Moana in a very short time.
Yeah, the other thing too is I think back to Disney's, animated features that they used to do, and it felt like, up to a certain point, their sequels were all sort of direct to VHS or direct to video.
Yeah.
Now that's a
Yeah.
90s phrase right there. I'm aging myself a little bit. But they didn't really make like animated feature sequels that had the same epicness and scope that the original classics sort of had. So we've seen this sort of extension throughout Pixar's history. They do have Toy Story sequels, and I think they got a ton of Cars sequels because of how much merchandise they could move. With Disney animated features, I think the first one was a huge, huge success. And that, the major one was Frozen 2. Is, I believe, if not to this day, still the highest grossing movie. It's second to like the Super Mario Bros. Movie. That one came out not too long ago. So they may be trying to position Moana 2 in that same sort of vein. Can we recapture the spirit and the epicness of the original
Yeah.
and, almost make a bigger number 2? That is possible. And I don't want to rule it out because they've done it successfully with Frozen 2. I don't know if you saw Frozen 2, but I actually really liked it.
I never saw Frozen 1, so
I like Frozen 1 too. I mean, I did know the songs. I don't know if I was, as caught up in the whirlwind as some of the little kids. I didn't have an Elsa dress, but maybe
Okay.
for Halloween.
Reassuring.
Yeah. But I'm assuming they're trying to recapture that. If they can do it right and they have a story to tell, then I'm all on board. Because I think, what happens with a lot of, especially like direct to TV or direct to video sequels and some of the cheaper sequels that we've gotten through the years, it's like it was made to capitalize on the success of the classic.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But it
Absolutely.
just didn't stand on its own, right? You'd only really like it if you saw the original. And it's like, can they build something here that's, meaningful and stands alone? So I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully that's the direction it goes. But Mufasa, this is actually, I guess, a prequel to The Lion King, the 2019 version, which also made like $1 billion. In fact, I might even be wrong. Like, technically, if 2019's Lion King was an animated film or considered an animated film, even though I know it was like pitched as live action, that might be the highest grossing animated movie of all time.
So this is in that quote unquote same live action vein.
Yep.
All right.
So I'm not sure why. And I'm also, I was trying to get confirmation specifically if they were having James Earl Jones come back for this, because he did do the voice in the 2019 version.
Yeah.
So I was like, but I read somewhere that I think he retired, or he at least retired from like Darth Vader. And I couldn't get full confirmation. I saw his name associated with it in different things, but I was like, is he though doing it, or is this like he's lending his like
Voice
digital
likeness.
voice?
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't get a confirmation on it.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Because I'm not gonna lie, his digital likeness of Darth Vader actually sounds great.
Well,
like,
I mean, part of what makes Mufasa so iconic is James Earl Jones. So
again, this is a sequel where I'm kind of like,
what if young Mufasa's voice is like Chris Rock or Chris Tucker?
So awesome. Yeah, that would be great. And then again, like reading about it, like it, obviously they're like, oh, we're going to explore a younger version of Mufasa and all this stuff and sort of how he like comes to, understand leadership and stuff. But at the same time, I was like, is there anything there that needs to be told?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
So they also announced a couple other things. Inside Out 2, you're getting some new emotions. There was a trailer, which I don't know if you had a chance to watch it. It actually looked really good.
See the trailer. I think I saw the first Inside Out.
I saw it.
And I know a lot of people really liked it. And it looks like it actually is kind of an interesting trailer in the sense that you're like, okay, this is a movie based on like a kid's emotions. So what happens when kids grow up? Like I do think that's
a natural sequel. That's a progression that like, well, what happens when a kid, reaches teenage years?
Yeah.
And then all these new emotions come in and take over. And you're like, that works for me. Yeah. That almost seems like exactly what I might ask myself. Like, oh, it'd be really cool if like they did the mind of a teenager.
Yeah. Right.
And they go there. I'm like, that's perfect. So, and I love Pixar. I mean, again, it's so weird. Pixar movies getting all these sequels, though.
Yeah.
I almost always liked that they were a little bit standalone. It made them feel like they were built to be original, to be special. I
Yeah.
think sometimes when you sequelize everything, it almost feels like the first one, then it's like it's built with sequels in mind.
Hmm.
And then therefore you're not getting like A plus plus plus. Some stuff is being reserved for the sequel.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so it doesn't appear to be the case with Inside Out 2. I don't know if they ever intended that, but I always liked how Pixar films felt standalone.
Yeah, I would agree.
Or even, to the certain extent that for a long time it was sort of like the only franchise that gets sequels at Pixar is Toy Story just because of how special it is to their
Yeah.
history.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of like that. But I'm like, I don't know if I want sequels to everything that I liked. Sometimes a story's just good on its own.
No, I agree. I agree.
So they also announced, which this is kind of cool. It's back to its roots, Alien Romulus.
Ooh,
Now there is
so
a. Did you see the trailer for this?
I actually really liked the trailer. I love the original Alien movie. It's one of my favorite scary movies. I also love Aliens. It's one of my favorite action sci-fi movies. I feel like the trilogy kind of really the franchise really sort of went off the rails for a while with all the other Aliens films and then Alien Predator crossovers, and then they tried to restore it with kind of like the Prometheus Origins thing. And I felt like all of those got away from the essence of what the Alien franchise is supposed to be. And this trailer, granted, it's only a trailer, but I think it very much gets back to kind of that original
Yeah,
Alien
stranded on a
quality.
space station with the alien. You have to, it's a fight for survival, and you got to try to kill it.
Yeah, I was like, this looks. When I remember hearing about it, I was like, and then seeing it, I was like, no, it looks like you guys are actually doing this one correctly, getting back to the roots.
Yeah, and I believe Ridley Scott is involved with that as well, and he
Mm-hmm.
was the one who was pushing for like Prometheus and all that. So hopefully there's some connective tissue here and they can sort of, I think the purpose of Alien Romulus for me, like you said, would be to sort of restore order to this property that deserves it,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, I'm on board for like, well, what are we doing next?
Yeah,
Like
that's
that'd
how
be
I
pretty
feel.
cool.
That's how I feel.
So let's hope they can restore some order. I also noticed there were some pictures and stuff released. This isn't from Disney, but there's going to be a new Michael Jackson biopic.
Oh, I did hear about that. I have not seen anything of it. I don't
Yeah,
know any like. I
I
mean,
didn't see
obviously,
anything either, but apparently it's Michael Jackson's nephew is playing Michael Jackson, and he looks obviously remarkably like a young Michael
really.
Jackson. Yeah,
Okay.
which is incredible. So the casting looks good from a visual standpoint. Now, is this kid an actor? That is hard to say.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
always a tough one when it's
and this looks
somebody
like it's
like that.
falling right in that vein of Bohemian Rhapsody, Rocket Man. They have the new Amy Winehouse one coming out. I just went to the Bob Marley one. It looks like it's right in that vein of these sort of popular artists that we've seen documentaries about them. Their music still stands the test of time and gets played today, but we need an updated biopic to take a look back. And I
Oh,
think for me, I look at this. I love
yeah,
Michael Jackson's
yeah.
music. You know that. Billie Jean's one of my favorite songs. And I'm a huge fan, but also kind of like I discussed if you go back a few episodes when I talked about the Bob Marley One Love movie, is there more than just sort of hitting the check boxes on a Wikipedia page to this biopic? Is there something or some level of understanding about this person that hasn't been explored before? Or, obviously this is being made with some level of his family's involvement. Now, while that may also taint things a certain way, right? And sort of put on rose-colored glasses to the script and try to make it as favorable as possible, is there an element of anything that hasn't been explored with Michael Jackson that this movie can really tackle? That's not just me going to the theater for the celebration of getting to hear his songs for the 300th time.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I mean, especially someone like Michael Jackson who has had a very complicated history. things in his own life, plenty of accusations after his death. It's a lot. And I mean, he is the Prince of Pop, so they better be playing some Michael Jackson music, but it will be really interesting to see what this one looks like and what aspects of his life it covers.
Yeah, there was a I think it was like a TV fictional miniseries that came out, I think at the end of the 90s, that was really interesting because it focused a ton on his childhood. And I think what it was exploring was how hard his father was on himself and the Jackson Five, and what that yields in terms of both their fame and their success within music, but also individually, how did that affect how they grew up, how, these people turned into adults. And
Yeah.
that's an interesting theme. That seems worthy of exploring, right? He pushed them incredibly hard
Yeah.
and he got his desired outcome. They were incredibly successful, but at what cost?
Yeah.
And that's a cautionary tale both for probably kids and artists that are going through it, as well as for parents that may be
Mm-hmm.
pushing their kids to, you know, do some, really hard things. So I don't know. I don't know what this is going to cover. And it didn't seem like they made any major announcements, but that's where my hesitation for this is. Is it just a celebration?
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
let's just get some Michael Jackson music in there and everybody's going to want to see it. And okay, uh, I'll go. Of course, I'll go. But yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Interesting.
So there's going to be a new movie called Ballerina, which takes place in the John Wick universe. And your
Yeah.
your opinion is what I want to get here. Are you down for this? A sort of not just John Wick 10, like an exploration of more characters in this world?
Potentially, potentially, and I say potentially because I heard this great story about when Keanu came on to the John Wick film. Essentially, he got the producers in a room and he said, "All right, everyone, go right on the board everything you hate about an action movie." And everybody went up there and they're like, "Oh, cheesy one-liners, over the top explosions, all that stuff." And then he said, "Okay, now on this other board, we're going to write everything that we love about action movies." And essentially, they took those two lists and they said, "We are going to run every decision we make in John Wick against these two lists to make sure that all these things we hate are not in this movie and everything we love is in this movie." And I think that stylistically, that's why I think John Wick feels so different than every other action
Hmm.
shooting martial arts movie, because they went into it with a lot of intentionality. So I think as long as they can keep that same focus with this and making sure that it is something that's different and original, where you watch these fight sequences that are compelling and interesting and not kind of over the top and overdone, then I think it would be a really cool movie to see.
Yeah, and my understanding is that Keanu Reeves will make an appearance in the film. He will be in it, so there will be that direct connective tissue. And it does seem like to me possibly a cool extension for what you just described. You have these fans of action movies that want to keep making more of them, but Keanu Reeves probably can't do it forever.
Mm-hmm.
So hypothetically, you could always just go start a new franchise. But for the sake of action movies and making sure that these things can continue to get funded, it seems like a little connective tissue here can go a long way. If that understanding is there, that the same love and appreciation for this genre goes into this new sequel, it's very likely then that this franchise might be able to continue on despite the title character name. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
call them John Wick, but we all know it's in that world and we know what to expect. Because I think sometimes, and this is why sequels can be very beneficial. If you go create a new franchise, well, you got to build it from the ground up.
Yeah.
Even if you have the same creators, they're not invested. That it doesn't port over one to one, where everybody that loved John Wick is like, oh, now I love this one because these same guys went and made it. No, unfortunately, they want more stuff in this world.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think this is a case of a sequel that maybe could do wonders and, allow for, a little bit more expansive world building. Could be cool.
Well, and they recently came out with the series, The Continental, to explore that same original world that they built in John Wick. And I have not seen it, but I talked to one of the writers and I know a couple of people who have,
That's
and
awesome.
everybody seems to love it. So if they can stick with what's working, I think this could be a really cool film.
All right, CP, that brings us to our final movie we're going to discuss from Cinemacon. And this trailer dropped last week. So I got to get your opinions on it. The teaser for Joker 2, which I think it's, what is it? A Folie à Deux or
Yeah.
something?
Yeah.
That's how they're doing it. And apparently, this sequel, while it does inherit a lot of the visual style from the first one in terms of that griminess and that gritty look and all of that, is very different. I have heard that while initially pitched as a musical, it is not necessarily a musical so much as a film that has big musical elements in it. What are your thoughts?
I don't know yet.
You watched the trailer though, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. We'll see what we get when we actually get to the theater. Obviously, you know, Joaquin Phoenix was incredible as the Joker the first time around. It's a film with a lot of complexity. They're really doing an interesting dive into the character of the psyche of the character of the Joker. I like the decision to set it sort of when they did in the first one, but I mean, we did a whole podcast episode where essentially I talked a ton of crap on the movie because there's a lot of things that I don't think are original, and I think they're nice homage to Taxi Drivers. So
Yeah,
we'll see what happens with the second one. It is interesting taking it in a different tone, and obviously adding Lady Gaga is a smart move if you are going to have musical numbers, because apparently she can act and she can sing. So, that's kind of a safe bet there.
agreed.
But it's at the point where I don't know what to really expect from it until we get it. What do you
So
think?
honestly, from the trailer, my favorite moment in the trailer is somebody asks him, the Joker, what's changed? And he says, I'm not alone. And I think right there that's your pitch to the audience is, yeah, this is going to be a different, it reminds me of, did you ever watch the show Dexter? It's about a serial killer in Miami who,
Oh, I thought you meant the kid who had the laboratory.
Dexter's Lab. I watched
No,
that
I'm
too. Yeah,
joking. I watched both.
Cartoon
Watched
Network.
both.
No, but Dexter, like, it's this guy who's, hiding his identity, but going around using a code as a serial killer to take out the bad guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the movie often it's often exploring themes of like, as this serial killer, like, can he actually fall in love and not just fall in love to maintain the illusion that he's a working family man?
Yeah.
Can he have a friend? Right?
Yeah.
Can he emulate another serial killer and get better? So they
Mm-hmm.
ask these questions, but all around the assumption, right, that you're dealing with like a serial killer.
Yeah.
And I feel like here, what they're sort of doing something similar, where you have this guy who has, some mental issues, and they're asking questions like that. You know, what's changed? Like, maybe he's in love, maybe he has a friend. Well, what does that mean? Can he? I mean, will it work, or is it a disaster from the, outset? That's interesting, and I like that.
No, I agree. I totally agree.
So I'm down for it. I mean, I thought the trailer worked well. It's familiar enough that if you were a fan of the first one, you're like, dope. But new enough that if you were a fan of the first one, you're also like, okay, cool. It's not just like a rehash. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely something new going on here. So I thought it served its purpose and definitely got people talking, and it got everybody excited about the film. So that's pretty cool. And we can look forward to that in 2024.
Wow. Yeah. Definitely some interesting ones coming out. Definitely some interesting movies.
I mean, the connective tissue here, CP, and again, these aren't all the announcements. These are the ones that I thought we would want to talk about. But the connective tissue here is clearly sequels.
Existing IP. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like and it makes sense that at CinemaCon, you would be appealing to the fan bases that already exist. So
Yep.
for announcements at something like CinemaCon, this makes perfect sense. So I'm not here to just knock sequels. I'm excited about a lot of these. But yeah, we do have a lot of sequels coming out and a lot of established properties. So I guess that's in our future. A lot coming to the big screen. And that's really, really exciting. So I'm excited for the
Oh
movies,
yeah.
man.
No, I agree. I agree.
I'm gonna work that A-list app, that AMC.
Yeah, dude, it should be like a lot of fun. So, yeah, I'm very optimistic. Let's put it that way. Because I felt like up until CinemaCon, there were a lot of movies that we heard were coming out, but we hadn't seen anything, we hadn't heard anything. And it felt so late in the year that I was like, I feel like we should really know a little bit more about some of these movies. So after everything that happened last week and this weekend, I'm like, okay, cool. Now we can start really getting ready for another good year of awesome movies.
Yeah, I'm excited. Very pumped. So that actually does it, CP, for our episode this week. Little rundown of CinemaCon announcements and look forward at what movies and what IP we have coming out soon. So pretty cool. And I had fun discussing it with you because basically these all just popped up in my feeds, my
Mhm.
at my personal feeds, and a lot of these I was like, oh, I gotta call CP anyway. So I was like, let's just talk about it on there. I'll
Yeah.
send him the list, go check out the trailers, and then let's just talk about it on the podcast because I was like, I'm probably gonna have like an hour-long discussion with you anyway.
Yeah, right.
So that was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. But keep an eye out, listeners. There are obviously some scenes and trailers that were dropped exclusively at CinemaCon that might be hitting the internet. Usually it takes a little delay so that people can, revel in being first to have seen it.
Mhm.
And so those might be dropping soon. So keep an eye out on YouTube and your social media feeds because these might pop up. But be sure to continue the conversations. We'd love to hear from you guys. What movies are you excited about? Which ones do you think are a complete waste of time? And are there any that there were no announcements that you're still waiting for? Is there, I think we talked a week ago about the MCU and how they had all these projects announced, but I'm like, I don't think they're doing them all. Is there anything out there that we didn't hit on that, is supposed to be coming out soon? And you're like, I don't know. Let us know because we might bring that up in the Pop Culture Minute and go investigate further.
Definitely.
So be sure to follow the show at filmmakerscompass.com and on our social channels at FilmComp Podcast. You can follow me at Big Kid D-Man and CP.
You can follow me at NDCal5. Thanks for hanging out and talking about all the exciting movies that are coming out in 2024. Until then, keep watching movies, and we will see you back here next week.